Hello everybody, I'm Laszlo Vasco, and this is my Micro Adventures channel. And today we're going to start a new series in the channel about cameras. I've already made a couple of cameras, but we're going to start a new adventure called 130 Years of Cameras in Action. We're going to trace, more or less, the history of photography starting from 130 years ago to the present time, and look at some of the key cameras, or maybe some of the not so key cameras that came along that route. And I came up with this because, as for those of you who have been with me from the beginning, saw that my very first video was about the history of pocket cameras. So it was pulling out some of my vintage cameras from my vintage camera collection. I used to collect and use cameras before I switched to digital in the mid-2000s, and I haven't used film cameras since. But after I've made that initial video, I got curious and interested in film photography again, realizing that there's sort of a revival for film photography, and went about pulling out my old cameras and went about acquiring some other ones. And then my interest sort of further shifted towards trying to better understand the early phases of photography, which led me to the idea of, well, let's just start from sort of the beginning. Now, I have to caveat that this isn't going to be the Wikipedia of photography, and so I'm not going to be covering, some of the key cameras and companies that were. Instead, I'm covering things that are relevant to me and the equipment and the companies that I became interested in based on my previous history and based on also where I live. And we'll get to that in a minute. But for me personally, my interest in photography started in the 7th grade when I got this for Christmas. This is the Minolta X700, which was Minolta's flagship camera in the 1980s, for manual focus anyway, before they went autofocus. And so this was brand new when I was in 7th grade. It was amazing to receive this as a Christmas present, and it started my fascination and my love of photography, leading to my current equipments that I use. I'm a Micro Four Thirds camera fan, and shoot with the Panasonic G9. And I love the lenses and the compactness of that Micro Four Thirds has to offer. And I'll cover all of this later. Well, we'll start from the beginning, 130 years ago. So we're going to start with this, a camera from exactly 130 years ago, from 1894. And this is the American Camera Manufacturing Company. And this camera was manufactured in Northborough, Massachusetts, which is literally 2 towns south of where I currently live. And the history of this goes back a little bit further to the Boston Camera Manufacturing Company, which in 1892 patented the paper-backed roll film. So this is where you take a roll film and you have the paper attached to it on the back. It's wound up really tight. So for those familiar with medium format film, of course, that's how 120 film works. And then on the back of the paper, you have the numbers for the various frames. Well, that all started in 1892 with the Boston Manufacturing Company that came up with this concept. And they also came up with the idea of then having a red window on the back of the camera to be able to see where your frame is. And they called it the bullseye, which subsequently, as you'll know, became famous for the Kodak bullseye cameras, leading to the Brownie cameras. And that's because Kodak first licensed this patent and subsequently acquired the whole lot. But before they actually acquired the whole lot, it already changed hands. So the Boston Camera Company, which manufactured these in Boston, and worked with with Thomas Blair from the Blair Camera Company, which sold and retailed these cameras in New York City and in London and elsewhere. And eventually Blair purchased the company and set up a new company called the American Camera Manufacturing Company in Northborough, moving manufacturing from Boston out to Northborough. They only made it there for a couple of years before Kodak then, or George Eastman, went ahead and acquired the whole shebang and moved manufacturing over to Rochester and continued to manufacture these. So there were a couple cameras here. So Boston called these the Bullseye camera, the Bullseye #2 cameras, which was more or less identical to this. But since this is the American Camera Manufacturing Company version, this was called the Buckeye. But for all intents and purposes, I think it's fairly identical. I don't have a Boston version, but it's more or less identical to the Boston camera manufacturer. Maybe for those of that are experts really in these 19th century cameras can comment below and let me know if I'm off on anything. So let's take a look at this camera in more detail. It features two lenses, one for viewing. So this is a very early version of a twin lens reflex camera. You have a viewing lens, you look down through, and you do your framing accordingly. There is no focusing on this camera. You just aim and shoot. There is no aperture. Instead, you have what is called a iris diaphragm, changing the various lens opening sizes from, I think there's 3 sizes, which simply control the amount of light that expose your negative instead of the depth of field, because it's not inside the lens, it's in front of the lens, so it simply controlled the amount of light going in. It featured a licensed shutter from George Eastman, or from Kodak, which was a rotary shutter. Oh, darn it. And this one seems to just, I'll have to take it apart now. It was working, and it clicked once here too, but basically you clicked it one way, and it's a rotary shutter. It was spring-loaded, and it kind of spun around and took a shot, single speed. You went the other way, and it again shot another frame. Now I'll have to disassemble it to see what's going on. Maybe maybe something got disconnected. Darn it. Oh well. Well, that's one of the aspects of, by the way, buying old vintage cameras. It may work as advertised when you receive it. A week later, it may not work. So let's take a look at further inside. So that's it for the controls. Basically, you set your amount of light with your iris diaphragm, 3 settings, large, medium, small. You wind the film here, and you'll see how that works in a second. And then you don't have to cock it. You just click the shutter. So it is made of wood, and it's really beautifully constructed, actually. And you can see that for a camera from 1894, this is in excellent shape. So it's made of wood with leather covering, and same for the housing here. And it has instructions on how to load the film and how to use it, all stamped into the wood. It's a start paper under cross piece. This is where you put your film roll. It would wind around underneath this, around these rollers. And these rollers just come out. But anyway, it would wind around the rollers to attempt to keep it flat underneath this cross bridge and all the way to your take-up spool. In a sense, kind of wasting some amount of film going all the way around such a big box. But that's the way it was. So I'm not sure if I'm going to attempt to use this. I guess what I could do is fabricate some adapters to be able to put a 120 film in here and then wind it around, and trying to figure out what size this is to be able to see what numbers I should look at in the red window. But that would be a way to try this out with currently available film. Fortunately, you can't get these larger format roll films anymore. But so that's how this camera functioned. I know that the Boston Bullseye #2 had a lens from Bausch & Lomb. Bausch & Lomb was a key factor or a key inventor in the whole early history of camera manufacturing, and also tightly tied to Rochester, New York. A lot of innovation is happened in Rochester. Although George Eastman's real talent was to be able to spot talent and know the direction that the industry was heading. So Kodak itself thrived by partnering and then acquiring small companies and then moving them up to Rochester, New York, which is what happened with the Bullseye cameras as well. And rather than necessarily, then as the company grew, of course, they had a big R&D lab and a lot of internal innovation. But in the early days, it was really, there were hundreds of these small camera manufacturers, especially around within New York State. And it was a matter of picking the right ones, and that's what made them more successful. So I think what I'll have to do, and I do suspect that this aluminum front plate is not original. I don't believe they had aluminum like this back in the 1890s. I guess I could be wrong, but I'll have to look at that separately. So I have a feeling this was repaired later on and added. But anyway, I'll have to screw it off and figure out what happened to that rotary shutter, and maybe I'll then add that in, take some pictures and add that in later on. Hopefully I can get this fixed. So obviously we're not going to use this in action anytime soon. I got to fix the shutter, but then hopefully I'll be able to figure out a way to put 120 film in it and shoot a roll and see. Really curious to see how it looks. So check back on a later episode for that. And speaking of later episodes, the next one will feature Ensco, which is a critical company in a sense in the early days of photography. I've already made a video with an Ensco pocket camera from the 1917. You could please check that out, but I'm going to revisit Ensco. It played a pivotal role tied to the invention of roll film itself. So whereas the Boston Manufacturing Company patented the paperback roll film, Ensco was a pivotal component of the actual flexible roll film. So I'll cover that in the next episode. So hope you'll be able to join. I'll keep these sort of videos separate on my channel in terms of photography and aviation and transportation and things like that. But I'm hoping through the 130 years of cameras in action to tie it all together, focus on history, focus on transportation, focus on having fun with cameras. So I hope you join along. Thanks very much.